Well, we're going to go over comic books and antique books and why I collect them and why I find it enjoyable. I look forward to sharing that with you, and let's get to it. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee. Enjoy the intro. So I get asked a lot, man, you have a ton of books, man. Have you read all these books? And I have to say that the majority of the books I have read, not every single one of them all the way through, but it's something that I enjoy so much that it's an ongoing thing. It's an ongoing treat, so to speak. I started probably collecting books probably when I was 7 years old. I'm sure, from what I remember. I'm sure that I had books before then. But I think the first book I remember was my Star Wars comic book at Checkers Drugstore in Detroit on McNichols. That was the first experience, I think, that I remember truly having a book that was mine. And I'm going to try to find it here in a second. Show you I still have it. So, but the passion of books and the discovery of finding books is just it's an addiction. And whether it be a comic book or an antique book, absolute addiction. So maybe you got bit by the bug, I don't know. But let me show you a few of the books that I have. So comic books when I was a kid, I read all of them, and as such, the damage to the book was pretty extensive. But it's still, I can't tell you the feeling it is of nostalgia and everything else having these books still. And it's just, it brings back, it's a time machine for me. Only understand it if you're completely absorbed by it. And you know, some of these, they ended up and folded up and rolled up and put in back pockets, and that's part of it. That's what comics were about. So I've had this particular comic book for 42 years, just about. So, but you can see the damage, you can see all of that, the tears and the love that it was given. So, but I enjoy it so much. It's not probably worth anything on the market, but to me it's priceless. One of the cool things about comic books was the advertisements, and this particular advertisement, the comic book didn't survive, but I pulled it out of it was such a pristine part of the book, I ended up pulling it out of one of the books that I had. And that's one of the original Star Wars Kenner advertisements. Gosh, I want to say it was probably from '78. I don't know which book it was from, but yeah, pretty cool. So why do you collect comic books? Why is that a draw? I get that a lot too. My brothers really didn't understand it. I don't think my sister did. I mean, that's just kid stuff, whatever. The stories, the creations, the escape that it brought to my life growing up as a kid in Detroit. It was right before we got into gaming and everything. I mean, ColecoVision, I think, was one thing. I think they had Pong out. That was about it. Atari was just coming out. So it was at that time where I was just mesmerized by these comic books, and it stayed with me all through my life. As I got older, I was getting more involved with larger books, older books. My dad had a pretty extensive library when I was a kid, and there was a lot of books that he was reading that he didn't really get rid of. So I ended up having an opportunity to pick those books up as time went on. One of the things I enjoy doing is getting into antiquated books. And one of the things that I look for with them are original copies, first editions. If I can't find a first edition, I try to get the next publishing or the next edition. And this can go, it could be at garage sales, it could be at antique stores, it could be at bookstores that specialize in old books, such as King's Books in Detroit, which I think is just a national treasure. A lot of the books that I find, though, I try to get in as good a shape as I possibly can. This Lorna Doone book is one of the ones that is one of my pride collections. I think that when you find a book like this, how I found it, and the inscriptions and everything else of who owned it, it was a Happy New Year gift, which is kind of cool. And this one, I believe, was from 1904. But for me, it doesn't really matter on what the book is worth on the market. It's more so how I feel with the book. Some of these books, and some of them are just textbooks. These were from the late 1800s, early 1900s. I do look for the best quality that I can possibly get. Of course, there's watermarks in a lot of these, and there's the pages might be frayed. The spines might have a little bit of damage to them. You have to look at that. I mean, it's really something, the page is torn, that type of thing. It's really something that it builds character to that book, as long as the book's not missing any pages and that type of thing. It's still enjoyable for me. So one of the books, these three actually are one of my finer selection of books. I look for ones that were rare as far as the production. Some of these you won't ever see a publication date, and that happened quite often in the early part of the 20th century. They didn't have any publishing dates, and when you go online now, you can check out what the publishers usually Google. You could do a Google search and find out a lot more about it now. But in that Avon edition, they had a lot of different book clubs and that type of thing that produced a ton of books, which in itself is remarkable because of the time that it took to print these books, the amount of time that it took to actually do the text and the lettering with the stamping and the metalwork, and just incredible amount of work to get one of these just published into production, which is just incredible. And I have a lot of respect for the craftspeople that put these together, from not just the authors, but to the people that actually did all the text and all the printing work. One of my favorite books, it's an interesting book to me, is Josephus's Completed Works. Josephus was a Jewish historian, and the book that the time that he lived was the same time as Jesus, and he was the first person to document Jesus as a person, and that is it's an interesting fact. And when I found this book, having it be a complete edition was quite remarkable in the age that it was. This one I think was produced, oh gosh, I don't even know now. This was in 1901. Now see, this one has some beautiful renderings in it, as well as a date stamp, 1901, a year stamp. I think that it's an awesome testament to have this, and then keep it for the next generation. You can see how some of the stampings bled over the years, and I think that, or excuse me, not over the years, but when they were stamped. And that's a testament to it, because it was a real process for these books to come, these books to be made. But you want to keep in mind too that the splines are something you want to look at. If you see any tears, if you see any ink damage, this is part of the character of the book, as far as I'm concerned. This is the scars of the book are sometimes the most interesting. One of the ones that came across my collection was the Pilgrim's Progress too, and that's actually a very, very interesting book. The end papers, you want to make sure that they're in good shape. This one was not owned by anyone prior, or it wasn't written down, I should say. But the engravings, the artwork in it is just remarkable, and I look for that as well. I think that there's, like I said, you have to be passionate about it. I don't really care what the market states about it or not. I really just enjoy the amount of time that it took and the talent, the craftsmanship that it took to create these books, the ones that I collect. But now with comic books, it's a little bit different. I'm not going to get into opening these and that, but to give you an idea on collecting comic books, the investment, return on investment, sometimes is just incredible. It takes years sometimes to get that to that point, but when you're dealing with whether it's a classic comic like Randy Zimmerman's Spank the Monkey, or a newer one like mine, Retrieve, you still want to look at it from a standpoint of the alignments and how the overall book looks. The corners, the way that it's stapled, the way that the ink is in good shape, if there's any cracks on the cover at all. But it really isn't about all that for me. It's about the fact that, you know, I know Randy, and I know that there's, you know, these are comic books created by, this is a comic book created by him, and it's enjoyable because now I'm kind of in the mindset of that person. I really want you to look at it from a standpoint of enjoying it for yourselves. One thing I would suggest in comic books, if you end up collecting, I would suggest that you try to get at least 2 copies of every comic. That way you can read one and then you can keep one. And sometimes that will help you if you ever want to decide to sell them but not get rid of your private collection. One thing that I can't stress enough is storage. Storage for comic books and storage for antiquated books. Antiquated books, it's pretty simple. Any book for that matter. Treat them like they're humans. They don't want to be too cold, they don't want to be too hot, so keep that in mind. With comic books, I always, and I've said this in my past videos, I always bag and board these. The boards are extremely important to keep things rigid, and as far as the bags, well, it goes without saying, keeps everything off of them and keeps them in pristine condition. Very simple, inexpensive, as we talked about in one of the last videos that I've done. And I mean, for example, this one this one I bagged probably way too late, but it still preserves it for the moments that I decided that I want to look at it then. The Spank the Monkey here, I want to say this is a couple decades old, and yeah, it's in great shape. So, but yeah, so always try to go ahead and get bags and boards for your comic books. Minimal investment, huge return. One thing that I always do too is I always store my comics in a long box. Make sure this is what you do as well. Do not lay them down like that. Get yourself a long box. One thing that I can't stress enough about is to store your books vertically. Store all your antiquated books vertically, with enough room so they do have some movement around them, and just off the back wall just a tad, just so that there's air that can move behind them. I want to thank you for taking your time out of your day today. Hopefully this answers a few questions as far as why I collect comic books and antiquated books, and maybe it'll help you along your journey. Much success, no envy, no fear, and have a great week. We'll see you soon.